Hello, everybody. I keep getting asked the question, how did I save Warwick over $50 million since 2011? I did talk about this during the campaign. The Warwick Beacon, the Providence Journal, and the Boston Globe did not put me in their newspapers announcing I was even running. But here's how I saved Warwick over $50 million. In 2010, when I was on the school committee, Mayor Avedisian was allowed to cut the budget of the schools by up to 5%. That ended up being $6.5 million. So, in the following year, it was supposed to go back up. I talked to Rep. Joe McNamara and several other representatives, and they all said that the following year, the school funding would go back up 5%. So it would go back up $6.5 million. That's called the Memorandum of Effort. So the city needs to make sure that they keep the Memorandum of Effort, and that is the funding to the schools, the same as it was the year before. They cannot cut school funding. Well, a year later, the state said that the cities could raise their funds back up by 5%, and nearly every city in the state did raise it 5%, but the city of Warwick did not. Scott Avedisian did not give any more money to the schools because he said the population of the schools has dropped, and therefore he did not have to pay the $6.5 million to the schools anymore. And the schools, of which I was on the school committee, was going to sue the city for not keeping the Memorandum of Effort, and we sent it out to a lawyer, and the lawyer said that we would not win the lawsuit. So we had to find a way to save money for the schools without cutting every program that we had. And in 2010, we started out by saying, well, if we don't have this extra money, we're going to end up having to cut everything: sports, extracurricular activities, everything. And we placed that back on the mayor because he had not raised the money back up. So at the time, we did not have a contract with the teachers. And the reason we threatened to sue the city is so that the teachers knew that we were in a spot where we literally didn't have the money. So we knew that we weren't going to, or at least I knew we weren't going to win the lawsuit against the city. But if we went to the teachers and the WISE union, which is the Warwick Independent School Employees Union, and to administration and said they cut our funding $6.5 million and asked for concessions to make up the difference, they would have said no, because you haven't even attempted to sue the city. So we put in a lawsuit against the city, and we got a preliminary judgment that the city would not have to give us the money, and we showed this preliminary judgment to the unions of the school. And so what happened was, they knew that we had already attempted to get more money, and they were willing to bargain with us more because they knew that things were serious. So we had to prove that, yes, it was serious. Yes, we could not get more money, and they were willing to sit down and negotiate with us fairly. So they didn't have a contract. We ended up getting a 1-year contract, which gave us an extension of 1 year to actually knock out real change for the schools, and something that was fair to the employees and to the schools. So what we instituted for that first year was a 20% copay across the board for teachers, WISE employees, basically all employees, administration, everybody across the board. We started with administration. We instituted a 20% copay for administration first because we did not want the teachers or the WISE union to think that that we weren't going to institute it on them. So we put it first thing first, administrators 20% copay across the board. We instituted it immediately. Administrators don't have a union, boom, done. Even though the administrators are the smallest group of people, we wanted to make sure we started with them. All right. After that, we went to the WISE union and the teachers union, and we said, hey, listen, we're going to end up having to cut everything. There'll be nothing left. So what is the most important thing to you in schools? Now, when I say we were going to have nothing left, we were at the point where we were considering having to go to an outside agency to do cleaning of the buildings and not even having our own janitors anymore. We were talking about getting rid of all busing for special education and not having our own special education busing people, okay? Which I do believe that we ended up going out to somebody outside, but we made sure that all of our bus drivers were the first people they hired. So our bus drivers still had jobs, even though it was working for a different company. So anyway, but in addition to bus drivers, the special education assistants in the classrooms and all that was going to be affected. So we went to them and we instituted the 20% copay across the board, and the union fought us for the entire year. Because that's their right to do that. They have the right to fight us on the 20% copay, but we dug our feet in and we showed them over the course of the year that if there wasn't a 20% copay, then we wouldn't have the money to run the schools. And so what we ended up getting them to agree with, and actually I was one of two people that were lead negotiators for the teachers. The other person was Beth Furtado. So the two of us, we were the lead negotiators on this, and this is why I take credit for this, because I kept pushing this agenda of needing to have a 20% copay across the board. So they agreed to a 20% copay across the board for teachers, and we got everybody else to agree to it, because once the teachers were on board, everybody else just kind of, okay, if the teachers are doing it, we're doing it too. So I think that's pretty much how it happened. So that 20% copay saved $4 million a year for the schools. Now, we still did need to end up cutting a few things, but we didn't have to cut everything. Now, but what I want to go back to is the most important thing. We said to the teachers, what's the most important thing to you? And they said special education. And what is it about special education that's most important? It's the student waiting in special education. Now, waiting, WEIGHT, that is a student that has special education needs would be counted as more than one student. So let's say we had a student that had some minor special education needs. They might be counted as 1.25 students in a classroom. With a little bit more moderate might be 1.5%, or a student that had profound needs in the classroom would be weighted as 2 students. Now, the reason this is important is because of class size. And the thing is, Warwick was the only school district to use weighting in the classroom, where they weighted students based on special education needs. And I think it's great that they did this. After I was off the school committee, they got rid of it. But while I was there, I promised that I would keep it, and I did. So if you had a classroom and you said that the maximum number of students in class was 20 or 22 or 24, and you had a student that was special needs, if you had 4 moderately special needs kids, then those 4 kids would count as 1.5 each. So 1.5, 3, 6. So those 4 students would count as 6 students. And then if you had a classroom with 24 people maximum, the most physical bodies we'd have in the classroom was 18. And the teachers liked this. It worked for them. And this is what they'd done all along. And I agreed. So I told the teachers, Beth and I talked to the teachers, and we said, hey, listen, tell us exactly what is important to you about special needs. And what we did was we got it in writing, because getting something in writing means that you're going to agree to it. And so we took that back to the rest of the school committee, and the rest of the school committee said, yes, hey, that sounds great. They're willing to do a 20% copay in exchange for the stuff. And frankly, I was willing to do the 20%. I was willing to do the special education stuff for them anyway. So I feel like I didn't give anything up, because I wanted to make sure that this weighting system was protected for our teachers, and they were willing to give up 20% of the copay for their health benefits. And that saved $4 million across the board. And since 2011, so 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 22, 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24. So 13 times 4 comes out to more than $50 million of savings for something that I was willing to do anyway. So, so negotiating a good contract that's good for the employees and a good contract for the schools is how I saved $50 million for the taxpayers. And honestly, if it wasn't for that change, the schools would have been bankrupt a long time ago, and the taxpayers would have been paying a lot more money. Now, I was off the school committee in 2012. When I got off the school committee in 2012, whatever happened on there after me, I had no control over. But I will say this, when I was on the school committee for those 4 years, when I got on, the schools owed the city $3.2 million that they could not account for from the previous years when I was on. I made sure that the schools paid back that $3.2 million back to the city. And the entire time I was on the school committee, not once did we go over budget. Not once did we have to go back to the city to ask for more money during that 4-year period. Okay? And I think that's a great accomplishment. So I'm financially responsible. I was able to negotiate savings for Warwick. And the other thing is, had I not gotten the teachers and the WISE union and all the employees to agree to 20% copay, the city still wouldn't be saving that money from the negotiations. So every year that goes by, the negotiations that I led with Beth Furtado save Warwick 20% of the copay. And because every year the copay goes up, every year we're saving more money. All right. So the other interesting thing is that the schools were able to get that done, and it kind of embarrassed Scott Avedisian. So later on, Scott Avedisian started asking for copays from the city. So the negotiations that I did with the school committee saved Warwick $4 million a year, over $50 million since 2011. But it also led to the city asking for copay from their employees, which also saved more money. So had we not done that, the city would not have gotten their 20% copay. Now, the important thing I want to say here is this. During my campaign, there were many times that I said that Frank Picozzi inherited issues, and he did. He did inherit them. He did not create all of them, but he's ignoring financial situations that are going to cause a problem in the future. So a lot of people say, and the reason I'm answering this question, they say, oh, you hate the mayor. You have a personal issue with the mayor. I voted for Mayor Frank Picozzi the first 2 times he ran for office. I expected that he would be doing more because that's what he promised us when he was elected. You know, I don't dislike the guy. There are things that he does that I do not like, but every time I see him, I shake his hand. You know, I say, hello, Mayor. Do I get upset about things? Of course I do. But I think that I've always been respectful, and I never say anything that isn't true. So if I say, why are we paying these taxes when this person didn't pay their taxes? Or why do we have to pay these bills when this person walked away from their debts? I mean, those are true statements. Those are true statements. And when I say as a military veteran that I honored my commitment to follow through and do my service to my country and someone else did not, I think that's worthy of pointing out. Now, some people can take that as an attack, but the facts are the facts. And so to follow up, that's how I saved Warwick $50 million. And I would be doing it again. And I would not be ignoring situations and telling people that everything's okay. Listen, telling people that everything's okay is part of the problem. Politicians always want to tell us everything's okay. And, it reminds me of Nero watching Rome burn. You know, if the politicians of Warwick were forthcoming with the financial situation that we were in, then when we needed reimbursement from the state for our schools, the state would be offering us more than 45% or 52% of our school buildings. If we told the truth about our financial situation to the state and to the Rhode Island Department of Education, instead of saying everything here's great, and then Rhode Island Department of Education goes, well, Warwick tells us everything's great, so we don't have to give them more money. Newport gets more money than Warwick. Warwick gets 45% guaranteed. Newport gets 52% guaranteed. Newport. Okay? Cranston gets 67% reimbursement for their buildings. 67%. They're getting 22% more for their buildings than we're getting. Okay? East Providence built all those buildings, the new schools, but they did it because there was a lawsuit between this city and the schools and the teachers in East Providence. If you talk to the teachers in East Providence, they're going to tell you that their salary was cut, and it got reverted back to 3 to 5 years before what they were making. So they were forced to make cuts in their pay structure in order to get their finances in order so that they could build those buildings. They didn't just randomly say, hey, we're doing great, we got to build these buildings. No, they literally went to the state and said, we are in a financial crisis, as I say Warwick is, and we need more money for these schools, and they got it. Okay? So I think it's really important to be honest about what's going on. Now, Providence gets 90% for rebuilding schools, 90%. So my entire thing was, let's be honest about what's going on with the city finances and tell the state and the Rhode Island Department of Education that the finances were not good. And then they could go in and say, hey, listen, we only promised Warwick 45%, but they're right. Over the course of the last 10 or 12 years, their financial situation has changed. The demographics of the city have changed. And that we're doing a disservice to the students of Warwick, who are much more diverse now than they were 12 years ago, and are not as economically vibrant as they were 12 years ago. We need to look at this funding formula again. Because if they came through and gave us the same amount that Cranston gets, 67%, that would have covered the $40 million more that the city of Warwick is going to end up having to pay if the schools end up getting this $40 million more for the schools. And if they gave us 75%, then that would be $80 million extra dollars the city would get from the Rhode Island Department of Education and the state for our schools, for rebuilding the schools. So when I say that the truth is not being told about the finances, it's not to attack the mayor. It's not to attack the city council. It's to attack not attack, but it's to just bring out the facts that these politicians are telling us everything's great when it's not. And when they tell us everything's great, the state and the Rhode Island Department of Education takes that as a message that everything's great. So I have documentation online, and you'll notice that for our schools, the city pays 75% of the schools of Warwick. 75% of the schools is paid for by the city. 75% of the schools is paid for by the city. The state and the federal government only kicks in 25%. For the rest of the cities of the state, many of the cities pay less than 50% of their schools, and the federal and state government pays the other 50%. So I'd like that looked at too. I don't think the Warwick is getting a fair shake. We're a state of 50 miles by 40 miles. 50 miles by 40 miles. And we're now the third largest city as far as population. We used to be the second largest city. We're the third largest city now. And there cannot be a disparity of that amount in an area that is so small. I think all of Rhode Island should be one school district, or at most 5 school districts. If we switched over to and I would have fought for this, if we switched over to a regional school system, and we had, the 5 different counties in Rhode Island were considered county school districts, then we would all be getting more money for the schools because the state and the federal government would kick in more. All right, so I'm going to end with that I did have a lot of good ideas. I did my best to put the information out, but when these newspapers didn't even bother putting me in the newspaper and announce me, they took away all of July, all of August, all of September. No one even knew I was running until October 10th, 2024, when the Warwick Beacon had their debate. A debate they weren't even going to have, but I fought for. I fought for that debate to make sure people would at least get to know who I was and who the other candidates were. I fought for it because I said to them that we have not had a debate since pre-COVID, and that the people of Warwick and the people of Rhode Island deserve to have a debate, and they deserve to see who their candidates are. Every time that I fight, I'm not just fighting for myself, I'm fighting for the people to get the information that they need to make a decision. So I hope that this was helpful. I hope that this answered your question. I don't want to be attacked or accused of attacking a person for no reason. Every time I do something, I do it because there are multiple reasons. And I don't always share what those reasons are. Sometimes it's just important to put the information out and let the people decide for themselves. I like to put information out and let people decide for themselves. You know, when I say that there's a person named in the lawsuit who slapped a person in the face, who's being sued, and the city's being sued, and the mayor's being sued because they slapped a person in the face and were accused of anti-Semitism and sexual harassment for the things they said, and then our mayor makes the wise choice to put this person, the same person that's named in the lawsuit, the same person that's potentially costing the city millions of dollars when we need those dollars to build a school, in a management position in the water department after he was already accused of doing these things in the water department. That's just a bad decision. Okay? It's a brazen decision and a bad decision. I think anybody that was accused of doing these things should be at home on paid or unpaid leave until this gets all sorted out. And then once the decision comes down after the lawsuit, you decide whether you're going to keep them or fire them, because that's protecting the city. And first and foremost, we need to protect the city from lawsuits. We need to make sure that we use our money and we spend it on things that we need, and we're not spending it on paying victims or paying victims for these lawsuits or settling to give them money for lawsuits. Okay? So I know this was a very long answer. I hope that it explains to you my thought process on things. And I don't fault you or anyone else for not knowing this information, because quite frankly, the media doesn't print it. And if you do a search for it on the Warwick Beacon website, if it hasn't been, there's actually a button on the Warwick Beacon website called search. And then you have to do an advanced search if you're looking for anything that's more than 6 months old. Okay? So if you do search and you look for sexual harassment lawsuit, you're not going to see a bunch of articles. Anti-Semitism, you won't see a bunch of articles. You know, school funding, you're not going to see a bunch of articles. But if you click the advanced button and you put a check in the box that says show me things that are more than 6 months old or a year old or 2 years old, you're going to get all the documentation. Okay? The other thing that I'll say to you is that the media allows you to see what the media wants you to see. And normally the Warwick Beacon, the Providence Journal, the Boston Globe, the Warwick Post will show you the first paragraph or two of an article, and they'll say, if you want to see more, you got to pay to see it. Well, what most people will do is they'll only read the first paragraph or two, okay? And I'll use as an example the article that's in the Beacon regarding Mayor Picozzi's 73% success rate in the landslide for the election. If you look in the first paragraph or two, it says, Mayor Picozzi had no scandals. But if you look at paragraph 4, it starts to talk about the scandals he has, including the lawsuit, including the anti-Semitism, including his debts. So the media manipulates what you see, okay? And people go in there and they look at the first 2 paragraphs and they go, oh my God, this is the best guy since sliced bread, okay? But if you dig a little deeper, which isn't that much deeper, then you find that there are real issues. So the media is part of the problem. And the reason you didn't see what was going on is because if you did a Google search under what has Patrick Maloney done for the city of Warwick, nothing's going to come up because you have to do the advanced search to see it. Okay. I hope this was helpful. I know it was a long answer. It's over 25 minutes, but have a great day.